Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door, darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there was spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then where thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not an instant stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched upon my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stirred decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculpted bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, "Doubtless," said I, "what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of nevermore." But the raven still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining that lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Hello and welcome to Raise a Glass, the podcast where we talk about the stories and storytellers that shape us. What you just heard was The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. My name is Eric Lintola.
And I am Hunter Danson.
And yet again, we say welcome. Hunter, before we talk about The Raven and many of Poe's other works that we've got the chance to read this week and at other times before, what's in your glass?
I have the Poor Man's Guinness, which is a McGuire's stout that I got at Aldi in my mug. What's in your glass?
It is a tea. It is called White Chocolate Obsession. Tea with the rich flavor of white chocolate. And there's a bunch of kisses on the front of this tea thing. It made me very uncomfortable when I saw it, but I am first taste right now. It's about as bad as you'd think it was, but it's hot.
It was not a pleasant face.
But it's warm.
Yeah. It's warm.
Yep. Hunter, what are you raising a glass or pouring one out for this week?
I am raising a glass to puzzles because I've had a puzzle on the dining room table for an embarrassingly long amount of time that I'm not going to say. But I was looking for something to do the other night. I was trying to wind down, and I didn't want to look at a screen, so I went to the puzzle and little,
Build
it's
your own screen.
yeah, and it was really good. It was a great time. I think we forget
That's awesome.
how engaging a puzzle can be, even maybe more engaging than a bunch of pickles. Pickles. Bunch of
A bunch of
pixels.
pickles.
Yeah, bunch of pickles. Pixels
Mm-hmm.
and sound being blasted at us.
That's good. You know, that reminds me of one of my favorite jokes. What's green and flies through walls? A pickle. You just have to throw it hard enough. Yeah, it's an oldie but a goodie.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Anything you're pouring one out for?
I'm pouring one out for, not because of, I'm pouring one out for church sound guys. Because
On behalf
on
of?
behalf of, yes.
Okay, that's different.
Yeah, because even if they do their job perfectly and amazingly, no one notices. And and if they mess up just a little bit in the Sisyphean task of making non-professional musicians and singers, and with non-professional equipment, sound good and sound professional. If they mess up just a little bit, then everyone notices them. But it's our sound guys at the church work really hard and don't get enough recognition.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
For me, I'm raising a glass this week to libraries.
Okay.
We went to the library, walked to the library near us for the first time yesterday. And Caleb got his first library card.
Yay.
And so now all three of us have a library card. All three of us got new library cards.
That's great.
My mom has worked the library for a long time and retired last year.
Mm-hmm.
It was just such a joy. And if you haven't been to your local library, go.
Yeah.
It is, once you go to your library, you're just going to want to go back and go back and go back and go back. Libraries are amazing. And they're getting even more amazing than I think they had been before. Like our library, you can, rent books, obviously, and movies and Nintendo Switch games and other different games and the new albums and sewing machines. Like libraries got it all. There was a puzzle there you could work on. Yeah, so did ours. Yeah. I learned about Mother Buddha. One of the librarians was sharing about. The way she was describing Mother Buddha was not actually. It was clear that it wasn't actually a Buddhist thing. So it was interesting. But libraries, I love libraries. It's been a long time since I've been to one of our local libraries, and so. Raising a glass to libraries, librarians, library techs, everybody who works in libraries, like, keep up the good fight. You're doing great work. I appreciate you.
I signed a letter in support of libraries because publishers charge too much for libraries to use to rent ebooks to people, and it's really, there are a bunch of other authors that people actually know who signed it too, but support your library.
I like that. And I'm gonna pour one out for potholes.
Oof. Yeah.
No more said.
Yeah.
So Hunter, before we talk about Poe, I just want to give a shout out to my wife Melanie. I was not clear enough last week that our special episode was at the special request of my wife.
Oh, okay.
Who's a big Taylor Swift fan, and I'm sure would have added a lot more to the conversation than either of us could have.
Yeah.
But it was Thank you, Melanie. I love you. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And I'm excited to see your face if and when you finally hear this. You're the best. I think it should just always be noted that Hunter and I raise a glass to specific random things, but there is always in both of our lives glasses raised to our families, specifically our wives and sons.
Yes.
So.
I was looking at author top 10 tips. Authors just putting like their own personal rules, and I forget who it was, but his first one was marry a loving and supportive wife. And it's true. If you want you need a lot of stability and support to try and write.
Okay, on that, we will be talking about Poe's story, a little bit of his autobiography later on. But in a very, I think the way Edgar Allan Poe would want us to talk about this is like just talk about the beauty of the art first, and then maybe talk a little bit about him. And then we're going to talk about some other works that he's done. Hunter, I wanted to bring the Raven before our conversation this week. I know that you'd also have read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe, more so than I had. And we're all for having this conversation. Thank you for making me sound good in reading the Raven earlier on in this podcast. I love it. I was first introduced to it my first year of college, actually, through a huge book of poetry. I might have heard it beforehand, but like I didn't connect with it. I don't know. It really kind of stuck with me. I guess now 10 years ago, 10 years ago. And when the first time I read it, I think I had memorized the first few stanzas. And I did not just do all of that from memory, in case anybody's wondering. But honestly, it's written in a way that one could memorize it because of the way Poe writes it. It's always easier to memorize things that rhyme. It's not an easy poem by any means. It's not a simple poem.
Yeah.
But it is a poem that sticks with you, and it stuck with me a lot. I've now read the Poe's own like philosophy of composition about the Raven, which is what we'll be talking about in a minute. So it's kind of hard to think of like it for me. Part of it's like it just stuck with me because that's what it does, and it's almost like it's gonna be a weird. Follow me on this analogy.
Okay.
It's like eating oatmeal when you're hungry, because like oatmeal like sticks to all the parts of you, like it just sticks to you, it just like clings on, it makes you feel full.
Okay.
And like you might not be able to, like, even if like it's not your favorite thing to eat, and growing up oatmeal was my favorite thing to eat, but even if it's not your favorite thing to eat, like it fills you, and it will you'll come back to it, maybe not all the time, but every so often. What do you think on that?
Yeah. I'd say Thanksgiving dinner, maybe. You have it once a year.
Wow, you think it's a feast?
It stays with you throughout the year.
That's where you get those 5 pounds that you can never lose. Hunter, I wanted to share my own version of a summary of this story. Poe talks about his own version of a summary of this place, but like I was on a plane today, and I made these beautiful pink sticky notes of the different stanzas. And it's not that long. I promise. It's a lot shorter than what I just read.
It's on sticky notes.
I am
2 sticky notes, right? 2.
4.
4. Okay. Well.
Yeah. But if I stick them together, it's only 2 front and back. Also, like, I need to figure out. I'm in an Airbnb right now that is amazing. And there's a light over my head, but I don't know where the light switch is. So give me a moment. I can't find it. Wait, here it is. Aha! I'm brilliant. Now I can read.
Oh, wow. Brilliant light.
So, here is my version of a summary of The Raven. A man wakes up late, or stays up late, reading books to stop thinking about his lost love, Lenore, when he hears a knock at his chamber door. Scared to open the door, he finally builds up the courage, opens it, and no one is there. He stands staring into the darkness, thinking dark things, dark dreams, he says, and whispering, Lenore. He closes the door, finally, and soon after hears a tapping at his window. When he opens it, a raven comes into the room and perches above his chamber door. He talks to the bird and asks it its name, and the raven answers, Nevermore. The man talks about the strangeness of this situation, of the bird perching above his chamber door, saying Nevermore, and doesn't talk about anything else. Some of this is hard to read, okay? I get the turbulence moments.
Oh, yes.
As I was writing
the pencil jumped.
Mm-hmm. So yet again, the raven responds, Nevermore, at the perfect moment in response to his question. So he goes on thinking out loud about it and even brings his chair in front of the bird. I think it's somebody like bringing their chair in front of the thing, just staring at it. He begins to think of Lenore again, smells her scent, and cries out once again. And the raven says, Nevermore at the perfect moment. The man starts asking the raven questions with the anticipation of the answer being nevermore. In response to that moment, the man starts yelling at the raven, calling it a prophet or a devil, and asks it more questions, to which the answer is yet again, nevermore. He asks it if he will ever yet again hold Lenore, in a different land after death, and the bird's answer is nevermore. In response, he shrieks at the bird, telling it to leave, to stop lying, and to, and I quote, take thy beak from my heart. Bird's answer,
nevermore.
And now the raven is still sitting, unmoving, above his chamber door, like a demon with its shadow covering the man's soul that will be lifted.
Nevermore.
So, Andrew, that was my attempt at making this poem maybe a little bit more understandable.
Yeah. I mean, you shared a little bit about this poem and how it sticks with you. Do you think there's any other reason besides like maybe the language and the sound of it that has?
I think in many ways this is one of my first introductions to poetry. The course I was in was a poetry introduction course, and I read a lot of different types of poetry, and this was one of 2 or 3 poems that I think about somewhat regularly. And I think part of it also had to do with just kind of how the dark edge of it. It is. We just talked about Taylor Swift's Midnights album, and that's what this is. This is a Midnights poem. Midnights to 3 a.m. if not later. This is a poem that's written about a guy who just wants the morning to come. And I don't read a lot of darker things, and this is definitely not Poe's darkest work. But it has a creepiness to it, but also it's such a rich piece that it's synonymous with Edgar Allan Poe. This is,
I think it's safe to say it made him famous.
Mm-hmm.
It
Not
was
rich, but it made him famous.
not rich, no, but it was popular overnight, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. And just the idea of like this bird, and like, that's one of the things that he talks about in the philosophy of composition, which I think we can transition to. I'll let you kind of describe in a minute, but like he talks about just the realism of all of this. Like so much of this piece it could have happened. Right? It's the idea is this raven learned one word, and the word was nevermore. And how often do we get in our own heads, like in a situation, and maybe not with a raven talking to us, but where like we're just kind of building ourselves up, like in frustration, in stress, in fear, in anger, in confusion, and often a negative emotion, or and it's just compounding on top of each other, and that's what this poem does. That's what the primary character in this poem is doing. And the bird is just the object that is the mirror, really pointing back at him.
Yeah, he works himself into a frenzy, not, and this is quoting the philosophy of composition, not altogether because he believes in the prophetic or demonic character of the bird, but because he experiences a frenzied pleasure in so modeling his questions as to receive from the expected nevermore the most delicious because the most intolerable of sorrow.
Hunter, what is the philosophy of composition? We've talked about it a few times. You just gave a really great quote from Poe about that.
It is an essay written by Poe, which is, I think, partly an attempt to actually benefit from his work. I think he was paid $9 for the Raven total. And
that's nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it was the 1800s, but even back then it was, as popular as it was, he barely made a cent. And he was poor. I mean, he tried to support himself and his family with his pen, and he failed. And he never succeeded. And this essay is Poe explaining how he wrote The Raven and the reasoning behind it. And he said it would be. He said he talks about how great it would be to read about an author retracing the steps in which they have created a work. And I think it's kind of funny in the introduction. He says, I am aware, on the other hand, that the case is by no means common in which an author is at all in condition to retrace the steps by which his conclusions have been attained. And then he proceeds to do it. And he says, the work proceeded step by step to its completion with the precision and rigid consequence of a mathematical problem. I encountered this essay in college. I took 19th century American literature.
Okay.
Not realizing that it was like a 300 level class, and I was not an English major. I just took it as like a 19th century American literature. I feel like I should know about that. That might be interesting. But it was a really hard class, and I passed. But
C's get degrees. C's get degrees.
Yeah. And it was kind of funny. I remember our professor asked us, do you believe Poe? Like, do you believe that Poe wrote this poem like he would have written a mathematical problem? And I don't. Not altogether. I appreciate his. What do you think, Eric? Do you think?
I was going to ask you that exact same question because he goes all into it. And if you want to, like, it's very interesting. Like it's a really interesting thing to read.
Mm-hmm.
Like he even talks about like he decided on the long O sound, followed by the R, and from there he's like, once you have that together, the clear word to lion on is nevermore. And in fact, that was the first word that came to mind. I
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in many ways this whole piece is like a work of just showing like how Poe writing about how smart he is. And I just don't like when people do that at
Yeah.
all. I don't think people are machines, and this feels like very much a machine process. But maybe it was. Honestly, I don't know. I don't have enough I don't know enough about him to say he was lying or like not telling the truth. And this might be how he remembers it. I know that I cannot remember how I come to the ideas of things.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't think it anywhere in any way like Poe.
Yeah.
I am not a rational step-by-step thinker.
Who among us can claim to be a rational step-by-step thinker in totality?
I did like some of the things. So like, some of the pieces that he said like made a lot of sense to me. Like he starts by he wanted it to be read in one unified sitting.
Right.
Like pretty much as long as it could be without being two sittings.
Yeah.
And so he's like, that brought me to about 100 lines. And like, he's a poet. Like I trust his ability to know the length of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and this wasn't the first thing he wrote. He wrote many things. I'm sure he wrote many unpublished things as well.
Yeah.
And so I would assume that there's level of creation of things. I don't know. I've heard authors talk about how they created plots to shows or to books that I'm like, huh. They're like, yeah, like I really like the idea of a Ocean's 11 and magic, and I hadn't really read too many like fantasy heist books,
Right.
and so that's kind of what this all comes down to. And you need each of the different types of characters in a heist, and you need the twist. And so like there's an aspect of pulling back the curtain that can feel a little like like it's not the beautiful pieces of it, which is where he starts.
Yeah.
But he gets so specific at times that I'm just like, even if he was thinking that and like he might have, like it was not in this type of rational order.
I think that there's some truth to the essay, but I think it's a lot of the detailed things are probably exaggerated. I
That's
mean,
what makes good writing. Often.
yeah. Well, the thing is, like, a good author can make a bad idea compelling. It can tell a story with a bad idea. And a bad author, no matter how good their idea is, well, if they do a bad job, like they're just not, it's not going to be a good story.
But they can still sell books and movies.
Yeah, that's true.
Are you ready for that, first player?
No, there is not a single shade in 50 that I would be ready for that. I tried.
Okay.
I tried.
It was good.
But I think the interesting thing, Poe said, my first object, parentheses, as usual, was originality.
Mm.
And he says the fact is, originality, unless in minds of very unusual force, is by no means a matter, as some suppose, of impulse or intuition. In general, to be found, it must be elaborately sought, and although a positive merit of the highest class, demands in its attainment less of invention than negation. And Poe wrote everything. we remember him popularly as a horror author and the author of The Raven. But he also wrote science fiction. He wrote a short story called The Balloon Hoax, that was kind of like describing a Zeppelin, the first Zeppelin, before there really was like Zeppelins. Um, and he does a lot of like hard science fiction in it. Goes into great detail about the design of the balloon and the science behind how the altitude is maintained. Um, I have a physics friend who I sent the story to, and he's like, yeah, like theoretically, the way that they maintain altitude could work, but maybe not practically. But I mean, this is the 1800s, and
Yeah, early 1800s.
yeah, and
He
like
died in 1849.
yeah, so like Poe wrote science fiction. He wrote. We're going to talk about the Purloined Letter. He basically invented detective fiction.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote Sherlock Holmes before Sherlock Holmes, um,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of other things too. And he sought originality elaborately, and he wasn't really rewarded in his lifetime. Poe, he died, I think, in his 40s. Um, he had kind of, I don't think Poe himself could write a more literary life and death than,
He died at the age of 40.
yeah, um, under pretty mysterious circumstances. Um, they're still not really sure. He was an alcoholic, so hazard to guess it had something to do with that. Um,
Mm-hmm. We still don't know.
yeah, but we still don't know. Uh, and we probably will never know.
Because his he was a his he was born in 1809. His father abandoned his mother,
Hmm.
and then his mother died in 1811 when he was 2 years old,
Yeah.
and then lived with family of his guardian John Allen in the United Kingdom.
Yep. Yeah. He had a
And then he
pretty,
married his sickly cousin.
yeah, and she was 13. He was
Yeah,
21,
he was 27.
27. Yeah, that's,
And then she died in 1847
hmm,
of complications of tuberculosis. Tuberculosis.
yeah.
I didn't realize she was that young. So there's a lot of pieces of this that, yeah, you said it earlier. You couldn't have.
Yeah. Uh,
Uh,
One of my favorite literary details is the Poe toaster, who, starting in I think the 1930s, would come on the anniversary of Poe's death every year, drink a bottle of cognac, and put 3 roses on Poe's grave in Baltimore every year, until like 2008 or something. I don't know. Maybe it died off and then someone else took it up. And I think they might be still doing it. But they wore a black coat, and they would always come in the early morning, before Poe's death, and they would wear a big black hat and kind of like a face covering, um, which is just perfect for Poe.
he also was. It's important to note. Most of the work he did was in popular magazines.
Hmm.
So he was writing both for a popular audience and for a critical audience.
Yeah.
And so there are, in the United States, especially, there were a lot of people who didn't even think of him as being a big deal. He actually, I don't know if you were, how much of this came into your research. Um, he became huge in France.
Yeah. So the other thing about his death is somehow this guy who hated his guts became the executor of his estate. and promptly went about destroying his work and destroying his reputation in America. But his work was translated in France, and he became very popular in France because he as kind of like a challenger of the status quo.
There's a quote kind of about that. The guy who translated Poe's work into French was the writer Charles Baudelaire, who I guess was pretty famous in France. One thing Poe taught Baudelaire in the middle of the 19th century, and what critics have taken a long time learning themselves, is that the most powerful and serious art in the modern era might take shape in what were once easily derogated as small or minor genres: the sensational tale, not the heroic epic; the occasional sketch, not the history painting. And Poe's, just this another quote from this piece. Poe's takes, he sketches the mournful interior spaces of the modern mind. I heard that. I was like, I feel like that's pretty accurate to kind of what I'm experiencing and what Poe talks about in his own, the philosophy piece, the philosophy of composition, but also like what you see in characters like main character in The Raven and in some of these other pieces, the Cask of Amontillado. Amontillado, is that how you say it?
I think so, yeah. Amontillado.
Like there is so much melancholy and like horror that's at work within somebody's own mind, and it's the horror is my wording of that. I just like there's so much of a desire for reliving the glorious and lost past. Past that is gone, never to return.
Nevermore.
Nevermore.
There's one other quote I wanted to share about how Poe shaped literature before we get into the stories that have shaped us. And that is my foreword by Jorge Luis Borges, who wrote, "Every writer creates his own precursors." And it's a quote that I was confused by when I first read it, but as I've thought about it more this week, there's kind of a circular relationship, because in my foreword, this guy mentioned some of the authors influenced by Poe, including Melville, Baudelaire, Dostoevsky, Robert Louis Stevenson, Oscar Wilde, Conrad, Conan Doyle, Kipling, H.G. Wells, Kafka, and Nabokov.
Just those people?
Yeah, just them. Just a couple lesser known authors. And I think that the idea is that if you were to read Nabokov and Dostoevsky and Louis Stevenson and Oscar Wilde, you would end up and not read Poe. You would end up writing something that Poe might have written. So it's kind of this like circular relationship.
Yeah, well, I'm also thinking like, hey, like if I decide to write fantasy, you'd probably see more Tolkien and Sanderson and Jordan, and maybe Rowling and Frank Herbert maybe in it. And you might see less of the other influences in my life. But if I started writing poetry, you might still see Tolkien, but you're probably not going to see Robert Jordan. Like I almost like, and obviously I'm just talking about genres, and it's more than just that. Like, but in a sense, like what you choose to write impacts who you might be channeling, at least consciously, if not also subconsciously.
Yeah. Every writer creates their own precursors.
Like that.
And so we're going to talk about some stories that have shaped us.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna let you lead this next little bit of it because a couple of these stories were, well, one of them was new to me. I've talked about the one that shaped me the most, and I will keep going back to it. So,
Okay.
which one do you want to start with talking about?
I'd like to start with the purloined letter.
Okay, start happy and work very sad.
Yeah, well, I want to save the Mask of Red Death for last because I think it's
Interesting.
the biggest one for me. It's the one I come back to.
Oof. Yeah. It's be in your mind.
Mm.
Do you want to give a walk through the
Yeah,
purloined letter
so
in a minute and a half, 2 minutes?
Yeah. At Paris, just after dark, one gusty evening in the autumn of 18, I was enjoying the twofold luxury of medication and a meerschaum, in company with my friend C. Auguste Dupont in his little back library or book closet, au Troisième, number 33, Rue du Nord, Faubourg Saint Germain. That is the beginning of the purloined letter, and it is a detective story in which a minister comes to Inspector Dupont for help in solving this case of a thief who has stolen a letter, purloined this letter in a very ingenious way, and cannot find it. He's searched the hotel of the thief. They know who the thief is in the situation, but the thief is clever enough to hide the letter in a place that they can never find it. And they examine chairs and tables with microscopes. They go through every inch of this hotel, and they don't find it because, as Dupont guesses, the thief has hidden the letter in a clever way that the French police would not have been able to guess. And if when I was reading that introduction, you thought, hey, that sounds like Sherlock Holmes.
Where's Sir Arthur Conan Doyle?
You're right, because this is this one little short story. It's not very long. Invented detective fiction. There wasn't anything like Sherlock Holmes before this story.
The very first adventure of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was published on October 14th in 1892.
Mm-hmm.
The Purloined Letter was published in April of 1845.
Yeah. What'd you think of?
Oh, as I was reading this, I was like, I have read this before, and it's not just because I've read Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but I loved it. I wrote it's all about sticky notes on the plane today. I wrote Proto Sherlock Holmes. I said full of wit, absurd deduction, and much too much thinking, yet wholly interesting and provocative.
Provocative.
Like it's just a very just makes you I really enjoy it. It was very different than the other pieces that we read by Poe for today.
One could say that the purloined letter is a very evocative object.
Oh man, remember reading that for first year of college?
Don't read it.
Don't no.
The rest of our class didn't.
Pouring one out. Yeah, that's true. People failed their first assignment. Nobody cared. This was a lot of fun. Honestly, the degree to which so much of this story, which is only a few pages long, is just the whole thing is just dialogue. Sorry, it's almost entirely monologue. And so if you're looking for like action, like the action always like had happened. And yet it's very fun to read. And it's so well, so for me, like, I think that it was so well communicated that I was like, oh, I know exactly where I knew the punchline before we got there. Which I think is part of the goal of it. What do you think about that? Is that right? Or do you think because or do you think that's just my modern view of it?
Maybe. Because we are very familiar with mystery.
Yeah.
And when Poe was
What's
writing
the twist?
Yeah, no one really was familiar with this when they were writing it.
It's kind of anachronistic.
Yeah.
Sorry. I thought it was really fun. It's a short read. You can read it in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Maybe 20 minutes, I guess. But it's I gotta be honest, I just kind of skipped over the names every time I got to them.
Yeah, there's a lot of some French, there's some Latin, there's even a couple there's some algebra equations.
Yeah. But that part was funny.
Yeah.
This is actually funny because we were talking about how in keep forgetting the name of this philosophy of composition, Poe is talking about creating the raven as a mathematical equation, and in the Purloin letter, the Dupont is calling out the French police because they only think of things like a mathematical equation, and they don't add the poetry to it.
Yeah,
which is where real reasoning is. And I think you could dive really deep into this thing and like try to dive through like the whole psyche of this primary character and what he's really saying. I wasn't interested in doing that on this read. I was just interested in reading it for the oh gotcha type moment, which I was excited to see come up. And this is definitely a character that, like Sherlock Holmes, like you want to like, but you realize that like it's not a likable character. But the character he talks to is the Watson, and like everybody likes Watson.
Yeah.
Because Watson's like a smart person,
right?
Like, but still a person.
Yeah, he's no Dupont.
Next to, yeah, he's not. Yeah, not a jerk. That's my simplified language for the many things that I think Dupont is.
Yeah, he's doesn't have too much patience for the prefect,
who is. I mean, it's hilarious. This is a whole piece of the prefect talking about every single rock band turned, like, and it becomes a joke. Like, oh, but did you check the grounds? Like, of course. Thankfully, they were all brick. So using our microscope, we were able to go around and see that there was no extra blah, blah, blah. And, when you roll a piece of paper, it can be put even in the back of a chair, like in the pegs that make up the chair, whatever. It's like, oh, we used a microscope and looked around every single one of it. If we found a piece of dust, it would have looked like an apple to us. We would have known. And this whole list just kind of keeps going on and on and on and on. Hunter, do you want to give the twist, or should we just let that be?
I think we'll let it be. It's short enough, and I don't think we need to spoil it too.
Yeah. I thought that was a fun little piece, and even just kind of the way that goes about finding it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really a sucker for kind of like the Renaissance man, like poet and mathematician, writer.
This tea is not good. I don't think I've ever spit tea back in the cup before. It's just not. It's all right.
But I don't know, just the kind of, I guess it's a mark of like 19th century literature, where there's just such a passion for learning everything and doing everything, and there's it's like kind of a fervor um, about uh, wanting to make a balloon that'll fly across the ocean, um, as Poe writes about in the balloon hoax. And if you read H.G. Wells, he has kind of that um, spirit as well, which H.G. Wells was influenced by Poe. um, and I don't know, I'm really kind of, I love reading like older authors who are writing in an earlier time, talking about imagining future technology,
Oh yeah,
uh, and not to like point fingers, but because they come up with genuinely interesting ideas.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Yeah, right. And I guess we'll end our discussion of the Purloined Letter with this one quote. Poe talks about, he's talking about mathematicians. The Watson says, "Oh, the minister is a mathematician and no poet." And Dupont says, "You are mistaken. I know him well. He is both. As poet and mathematician, he would reason well. As mere mathematician, he could not have reasoned at all, and thus would have been at the mercy of the prefect."
Hunter, we got two more we're going to talk about. I want to give us just a very quick walkthrough of the Cask of Amontillado, because this is another story that stuck with me for a while, and I honestly could not remember that it was written by Edgar Allan Poe until I came across it again. Across the name of it, it's like, oh, that's what it was. I've definitely thought it was a different book many times. And I can't remember what it was that I thought it was. Something that the title sounded the same, but the book itself is completely different.
Mm.
And it's just like a 10 page short story. And the premise is this guy gets this Italian dude. I think he's Italian. Yeah, gets slighted by another Italian dude, and he bears this grudge against him internally. He doesn't let the guy know that he's furious at him, and he plots his demise. He's like, "I'm going to kill this dude."
They don't even
but,
say what the offense is.
No, and that's one of the things that I think that I like what Poe does, and so many other people do around this time, and even through the early 1900s, is like the parts of the story that aren't important to the story don't get told. And yet the minute details that may or may not directly impact the primary narrative, like, are expounded upon. So you're missing huge chunks of things, and yet you focus on these tiny details. I think it's great. And so it starts with this guy being like, "I'm going to kill this dude. I'm going to find the right time," and the right time comes upon it. 1800s Italy. They both have fancy houses and lots of money and servants and wine cellars, in air quotes, that are really just crypts where their ancestors are buried, and they have wine chilling around it. And he tells this guy, Mr. Fortunato, that he has a pipe of Amontillado, which I guess is super fancy wine, and that he was going to have Lucchesi, this other Lucchesi, give him his thoughts on it. And Lucchesi and Amontillado and Mr. Fortunato clearly are opposing parties. And so he pretty much tricks Mr. Fortunato into coming into his crypt. And the guy's drunk, which helps. And continually tricks him to walk deeper and deeper into this crypt in the middle of night, as a drunk dude without anybody else around, until he gets him in the very, very back corner of this crypt. And then brick and mortars chains him down into it, and brick and mortars him into the very back of his crypt while he's still alive.
Yeah.
And it is terrifying.
You can hear the jingles of his cap behind the
Mm-hmm.
mortar.
It is terrifying. This story, I think, is the scariest of all the stories that we read about. Like, I think it is scarier than what we're the Masquerade.
Is scary? What scares you?
The Masquerade. I think it's because you know what's coming the entire time.
Yeah.
And because he's playing mind games with this character. This is a story like I said, I remembered it from after reading it 10 years ago. But my note for this one was even creepier than I remember. Because I forgot about the mind games that happen. It's not just that he like brick and mortars him in, which is just horrifying, or the fact that you don't even know why he's mad at this dude, or the fact that this guy actually has a family and has a loving wife and kids and whatever. It's that across the entire way he this guy who's going to kill him like gives him opportunities to get out of it, but he does it in a way that's pretty much he's tricking Mr. Fortunato every step of the way to go deeper and deeper. Like all he had to do was say, "No, I'm fine," and go, and like maybe he would come get out. I don't know.
But the Amontillado. But the Amontillado.
The guy was drunk. Okay, it must be a fancy wine.
Yeah, no, I mean it's. I think that Fortunato is a more I don't know. Interesting is not the right word, but I think I'm intrigued by Fortunato because you don't get as much of him, and I think he's like you think about what kinds of things lead us to our worst mistakes, and a lot of the time they're kind of mundane things, like for a gambler, playing one game of blackjack is kind of a mundane thing, but many games of blackjack at the expense of everything else leads deeper and deeper into the crypt. And I don't know, that's what I think about when I read it. Just, Fortunato, he just keeps saying, but the Amontillado. And I love the beginning dialogue where he's like, "You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain." And Fortunato says, "Amontillado." And then he says, "I have my doubts. Amontillado, and I must satisfy them. Amontillado." As you are,
the dude was drunk.
Yeah.
I in Fortunato's defense, like,
yeah, but
like
it's
by the time.
Sorry. I'm not trying to make fun of Fortunato. I'm saying like I understand. It's this allure of the Amontillado.
Yeah. What's the Amontillado in your life? What is it that you're unknowingly following to death? What is it that is becoming the primary thing in your life? That's not a question to answer.
Yeah.
It's a question for all of us to ponder. It might seem kind of jokingly. Obviously, I bring it up jokingly. But those are the type of questions I like asking.
Yeah,
thinking about.
Those are the type of questions Poe thinks about, I think, too.
Because like there's niter along the walls that like are causing Fortunato to go into coughing fits, and he's using some liquid courage, one might say, to get through them. But like, it's damp, it's dark, it's
ignoring all the warning signs.
It's like watching a horror movie where the character you know the character's gonna die, and you're seeing the evil character like give them ways out, and they're not gonna take it, and yet you want them to.
Yeah,
I've been in I spent time in Scotland, and I was in Edinburgh. And Edinburgh is a city built on top of a city. And it was only in the last 30 to 50 years they found the city underneath it. It was sealed off because of the Black Plague. And this is, yes, a transition to our next conversation. But I was in the lower city. It's probably not the right wording, but catacomb type feels. Again, not catacombs like you would envision in Italy, but at midnight for a night tour with my sister at one point, and they turned off all the lights, and it's terrifying. It was not just dark and scary and dank, but you could, I don't know, I was it felt like the type of place where if there were evil spirits that were walking around, and I did not believe in spirits, that's where they would be, reaching out and touching you, and they're walking past dead relatives from ages past, and everything about it just says turn back. But talking about the Black Death, let's then talk about the Red Death. Tell me about the Mask of the Red Death.
The Mask of the Red Death. I think I read this in high school the first time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I had kind of a weird thing that would make me seek out horror stories and movies.
So it wasn't part of your schooling. You just
it might have been.
To.
It might have been, or it might not have been. I don't remember. But I remember the story. It is about a country that is in the midst of a plague that is terrifying. It can kill people in
30 minutes.
30 minutes. And Prince Prospero makes this castle, fills it with all kinds of amenities and entertainments, and locks the doors and invites some of his friends and merrymakers to come and live in the castle. No one's allowed out. No one is allowed in. There's servants and musicians. And everyone is wearing these grotesque masks. It's kind of like a masquerade ball, but never ending and in the middle of a plague, and you can't leave. And there are these rooms, many colored rooms that are decorated very gaudily, in which the people hang out. There's a blue room, I think, and a green room, like a purple room. And there's one room that no one goes in, which is the black room. And in the black room, there is a clock that clangs every hour. And it tolls the number of hours. And when it tolls, the musicians stop playing. Everyone kind of stops and listens to the tolling, and then goes back to their merrymaking. And at midnight, the bell tolls 12 times, which is longer than all the other tolls, and people start going back. But then there's this new figure who appears in the castle. And people, even though they are wearing very grotesque masks themselves, they recoil at the sight of this figure in his mask. And there's a little excerpt I want to read. It's not very long, to give some atmosphere. There was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams. And these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And into these dreams and these people comes the mask of Red Death, and he is a figure of the plague. And he goes through the rooms. People part for him, and he sees Prince Prospero. And Prince Prospero, even though he has a taste for the grotesque and the wanton and the irreverent, recoils, and he says, "How dare you?" And he asks them to seize them, but they all kind of step back from him because they can't touch him. And the Mask of Red Death keeps going through all the rooms until he gets to the Black Room, and Prince Prospero comes after him with a dagger. And the Mask of Red Death turns around really quickly. Prince Prospero drops the dagger, and he falls dead. And all of the revelers afterwards, they finally go and they seize the Mask of Red Death and find that there's no one in the clothes. And they all die. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had to come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.
I at first was confused when you said earlier that you keep coming back to this one. I'm understanding it more now as I think about it. But why, Hunter? Why this one?
It is a story that I have never forgotten since high school. And I mean, part of it is the imagery and just the experience. I think Poe's style in this story is very poetic, and he employs some of the skill that he shows in The Raven in the wordplay to create atmosphere and introduce the dreams. And it starts off as with kind of exposition about the plague, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is very plausible, and it just becomes more and more strange and kind of supernatural until the Red Death shows up. And I'm struggling to find like a concrete thing that has stuck with me, but I think part of it might be the justice of, not, maybe justice is not the right word, the um, vengeance of the Red Death in the way that he punishes the revelers, and that no one is safe from the Red Death.
Yeah.
That no one can be made safe by money or by power, and that the Red Death will come. And I think all of us are often dismayed by injustice in the world. And I think sometimes we wish for vengeance. And
yeah,
I mean, I even when I like, even for imaginary things, I wish for vengeance. Like when I'm watching a TV show or something, and like there's a couple episodes of the X-Files with some really heinous serial killers, and I'm just like, man, I have like zero sympathy for this character. And but we do that with real people too. And I don't know, this story just reminds me of that there is justice beyond our realm. It kind of hints of that, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the. So those are a couple of things that I was thinking about as we're starting this conversation. I was thinking about why this would be a piece that would come back to you, and that's a similar reason as to why it would come back to me. This is the first time I've read it, but the idea of this decadence and trying to escape the death in the world. I mean, honestly, that's the main character in Ready Player One's goal.
Right.
That's like his piece. Like, let me get out of this place.
Yeah.
And I was talking with some friends just yesterday, and one of them really wisely was saying is that so many of the decisions that we as humans make are about prolonging our life.
Mm-hmm.
And for so many people, the pursuit of money and power and influence, in his thesis, is that that's a way of, when all the things go bad, who is it that's most likely to get out and or be pushed away? Be in their own space, like the wealthy, the powerful, the rich, the elite, and that all of it is a game to see who can live the longest. And yet, in reality, Red Death is coming for all of us. And it might not be a plague, and then pray it's not. But this kind of takes Poe shares in this philosophy of composition that his primary goal, outside of being original, is about the effect that he will have on the reader. Mm-hmm. It's less like his primary goal is not the story he's telling. It's the effect. It's not what people will learn or the truth that they'll gain. And he said those are secondary pieces of it, but it's the effect on them. And that, I think what he does in this is he takes a human situation and then makes it takes it to its extreme. Yeah. And that's, I think, what the Red Mask of Death is. Every aspect of it, from the greed and wealth and revelry to the speed of the death, is extreme. And even the lighting in the rooms is extreme, because there's no lights in the rooms. It's these tripods of flames that are going through the different glass windows that have been tinted so that they're red or green or blue, or depending on the color of the room. And the black room has blood red windows. And again, I think that's a visual aspect of bringing it to its extreme. And he's able to convey so much in so few words. And my wording for this, my deep takeaway from my Post-it note, is so dark. This whole thing is so dark. It is definitely the darkest thing. Well, I think Cask of Amontillado is way scarier, but this is way darker.
Yeah, I mean, Red Death held illimitable dominion overall, so presumably everyone is dead. Which is about as dark as you can get on this earth.
Part of me kind of likes that, though. Like, man, I don't want the rich people to be alive.
Yeah, that's the lost people. That's the avenging aspect of it that I think I liked. Sure. And oh no. But it's just I think especially in America, like you were saying, we tried to escape the darkness in the world with revelry and all kinds of distractions and dissipation. But we can't really.
Yeah. Oh, there could be such an incredible modern retelling of this,
Well, I mean,
like without even stretching that hard.
well, the obvious application is COVID, because we just,
Yeah, well, I was
but, yeah.
trying to not,
Yeah.
honestly, we could have a whole season where we talk just about like different plague stories.
Yeah. Well,
and storytellers, which maybe at some point would be right. It doesn't feel right now.
no.
There's a book called The Plague that I read for a couple years ago. Well, no, 4 years ago now. It was incredible. I was crying almost the entire way. That I'd love to talk about at some point.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like a story to talk about it at this point.
No.
So Hunter, anything else to share about Poe or the stories?
One thing I thought of an analogy, and I think I didn't really think about how much Poe influenced literature in general, American literature, especially before this week. I just kind of enjoyed some of his stories and his poetry and stuff. But I think that Poe is kind of like Robert Johnson in that he wrote a lot of really short stories, and not a huge body of work. Didn't really achieve a lot of fame during his lifetime, but his legacy, Robert Johnson is credited with the creation of the blues. Not maybe not the creation, but the consummation of blues, maybe. And his songs, he had like an album's worth of songs. It was like 30 songs or something like that. They were short, and but he himself, his life is kind of a legend. He's is said to have made a deal with the devil to learn to play guitar the way that he did, and has had a huge influence on blues and rock and roll by extension. And rock and roll is so big. When you think about Poe, like all of the authors named in this forward is huge, and it's not something that I had pondered a lot, but now that I think about it, it really is. Poe's is maybe not my favorite author, but I appreciate his influence and his legacy, and I can't deny that my own writing is very dark, and definitely takes inspiration from Poe and the kind of effect that he achieves. I don't know if I am how successful I am, but it's he achieved his goal of being original.
Yeah.
And
he has a mascot for a football team named after him.
Oh yes, the ultimate achievement.
I mean, tell me another author who has a mascot of a professional football team.
I don't know him that well.
There's none.
No.
Right, it's not the ball. It's the Ravens, not the Orioles.
The Orioles is the baseball team.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm just making sure. Yeah, Ravens. Whew. Just worried for a second there. Okay. Well, thank you all for sharing and walking with us in the middle of a dark episode, and I'm I'm filming. Oh, not filming. I'm casting, podcasting, speaking,
Recording.
Recording. That's it. From a bed Airbnb in a rainy Seattle, which is really fun. First time I'm here, but I definitely am feeling some of the aspects of Once Upon a Midnight Dreary as I wandered weak and weary over many quaint and query volume of forgotten lore. And hope if you're in that type of situation, you think of Poe. Maybe don't think of Poe's life, but think about his work, and that's a big piece that he focused on. Is the beauty of the writing that was so important to him, by his own words. And maybe he should be judged based on the beauty of what he writes versus his story. Maybe not. I think that's a piece that our culture is really struggling with right now, is how do we decide whether we should continue listening to or reading from or celebrating the work of somebody who may have done and or said and or lived in a way that we might fully disagree with. And I think there are certain parts of Poe's story that I learned today that might kind of cause me to ask some of those questions, and just because maybe it was okay 200 years ago, maybe not.
I don't know.
Doesn't sound right, but man, his work is pretty incredible, and is still impacting authors today or culture today, and
created a lot of precursors.
Yeah. Imagine no Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. No Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock Holmes.
No, I mean, no Scooby-Doo.
No Scooby-Doo. Yeah. No Lovecraft.
Is that like
H.P.
Minecraft?
Lovecraft. No. I guess, well, no Cthulhu. I don't know if you know that one. I promise it is kind of big.
Yeah. I believe you, Hunter.
No H.G. Wells.
The War of the Worlds.
No Moby Dick.
War of the Worlds actually has a very Red Mask of Death type ending.
Does it? Yes, for the aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now we ramble off into oblivion. I actually did that earlier, again, yesterday, talking with these same friends. Because of our conversations, I noticed sometimes I just kind of ramble off and I'll just kind of stop talking. Like I'm done and it'll be part of the way through a sentence. And I did that yesterday, and everybody was like, and I took a drink of coffee and everybody was like staring at me, and I was like, what? I'm done. Like, I don't have anything else to say. You're like, you didn't finish your statement. I was like, yeah, but that would have been a preamble to a much longer statement.
Yeah, it's weird.
Learn that from you, Hunter.
The podcast voice.
I think for me, the podcast voice is also the I'm sleepy voice, at least right now. But I guess you do. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I have a podcast voice too. I feel like your voice, you're very good at like enunciating. But even then, I feel like I get to hear your voice coming through.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it's my voice, not someone else's. I
don't hear somebody else's voice coming through.
Yeah.
And this is the rambling that we were talking about. So, on that, I bid you nevermore adieu.
And you, too.
And you.
Thank you for listening.